Hello, and welcome to this news event held by the law firm Peiffer, Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise, or Peiffer Wolf for short. You'll be hearing from three speakers today, and then we'll open the floor for questions during the Q&A period. The Q&A period will be for reporters only. If you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. For more information, you can go to lostembryos.com, where you can find the news release, the court filing, a copy of the falsified records, and family photos. And also, we're going to send direct links to those materials in the chat window here, so you can check the chat. As I mentioned, you'll be hearing from three speakers today. First, Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf. Second will be Melissa Diaz, former HRC fertility patient. And third will be Jason Diaz, Melissa's husband. So let's go ahead and begin with our first speaker, Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf.
Thank you, Max, and welcome to this news event. My name is Adam Wolf. I'm a partner at Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise, or Peiffer Wolf for short. Today, Peiffer Wolf filed a lawsuit and arbitration claim on behalf of our clients against HRC Fertility and Dr. Bradford Kolb for implanting an embryo that had tested positive for a rare and deadly stomach cancer gene. Our client's in vitro fertilization resulted in a beautiful baby boy who is now 1 year old. But this brave little boy will, at best, need to have stomach removal surgery when he is still a child. Upon being confronted, instead of owning its mistake, HRC altered my client's medical records in a manner that covered up its tragic blunder. Soon, you'll be hearing directly from Jason and Melissa Diaz. Melissa carries the BRCA gene, which drastically increases her chances of developing breast and ovarian cancer. Jason has a rare mutation in the CDH1 gene, which predisposes him to hereditary diffuse gastric cancer. That is a particularly rare and deadly form of stomach cancer. Jason and Melissa desperately wanted to have children, but they wanted to ensure that their kids wouldn't have to face the same pain and suffering that Jason and other members of his family have endured. They picked HRC Fertility specifically because it touted itself as an expert in genetic screening. Jason and Melissa did everything right. They created embryos and sent them for genetic screening. But despite a particular embryo being marked clearly as an embryo that carries the deadly stomach cancer gene, HRC and Dr. Kolb then wrongly transferred that very embryo to Melissa. The road ahead for their baby boy is tragic. It's life-altering. He will have his stomach removed. He will not be able to eat and digest food normally. He will experience daily gastrointestinal pain and discomfort. He will have chronic diarrhea that limits his education and employment. And he will be forced to undergo medical monitoring for life. But HRC and Dr. Kolb did not immediately take responsibility. Far from it. Instead, HRC's fertility employee did not even write back promptly to Melissa when she reached out to them. And in a later response, shockingly, HRC Fertility sent Melissa an altered version of her medical records. Instead of showing which embryo it transferred, the one with the deadly stomach cancer gene, HRC Fertility redacted the notations of which embryo it had transferred. HRC Fertility's actions are nothing short of catastrophic for this family. Sadly, this is not the first case I've handled against HRC Fertility. This is yet another chapter in HRC's history of mixing up patients' genetic material. Hopefully, by sharing this story and filing this lawsuit, Jason and Melissa can help make sure this never happens again. That concludes my statement. I look forward to taking your questions during the Q&A period.
Thank you. Again, that was Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf. Let's proceed to our second speaker, Melissa Diaz. Go ahead, Melissa.
Good morning, and thank you for listening to our story. Never in a million years did I think this could happen. We chose Dr. Kolb and HRC Fertility specifically because they were supposed to be leaders in IVF and genetic screening for embryos. We're heartbroken about what our beloved son will have to go through because of HRC's misconduct and lies. From the beginning, we were very clear with HRC Fertility. We needed IVF and pre-implantation genetic testing to avoid having a child with Jason's CDH1 mutation for hereditary gastric cancer. I underwent 2 egg retrieval procedures in 2020. HRC told us that we had only 1 clean embryo, meaning only 1 embryo that did not carry either mutation. In August of 2020, I had a transfer procedure with that clean embryo. Unfortunately, that transfer resulted in early and heartbreaking miscarriage. But HRC also told us that we had 1 male embryo that had my BRCA mutation and not the stomach cancer mutation. That embryo was going to be our plan B because the BRCA mutation causes breast and ovarian cancer. So the likelihood of it negatively impacting a boy was significantly less than a girl. So in January of 2021, we informed HRC that we wanted to proceed with the male embryo that HRC told us only had the BRCA mutation. Dr. Cole performed the transfer procedure on January 8th, 2021, and never told me there was any possibility that he was transferring an embryo with the stomach cancer mutation. In July of 2022, I reached out to HRC about doing another transfer. We wanted to have a second child before I had to have my ovaries removed because of my ovarian cancer risk from BRCA. A new person at HRC sent me a report about the embryos I had left in storage. That report had handwritten notes showing that the last embryo they transferred, the embryo that became my baby, had a stomach cancer mutation. We were blown away. I asked HRC's IVF coordinator 3 separate times for an explanation, but she did not respond. We just couldn't believe it. I requested my complete medical records, hoping it was some sort of record-keeping mistake. HRC sent me the records with the same report, but this time the handwritten notes showing which embryo had been transferred were whited out or covered up. It was shocking. My own medical provider changed my records. The fact that they tried to hide what they did by altering my records showed that they knew they had done something wrong. As it turns out, they misinterpreted the results of our embryo testing. There was no male embryo that had BRCA, but not the stomach cancer mutation. In fact, all male embryos had the stomach cancer mutation. In addition to knowing the lifetime of pain and suffering my boy had in front of him, learning that fertility and HRC and Dr. Cole deceived me was the ultimate betrayal. My husband and I trusted HRC. We trusted Dr. Cole. We trusted them to help us have a healthy baby. We went through the difficult and expensive process of IVF so we could spare our children what Jason has had to endure. We still cannot believe that after all we did, and after all HRC and Dr. Cole promised, our baby has the exact same mutation we thought we escaped. I hope that by sharing our story today, we can find some sort of justice and relief in our pain. But we also want HRC and other clinics to learn from HRC's terrible mistake. No parent should have to go through what we've experienced and will continue to deal with for the rest of our lives and our son's life. Thank you. That concludes my statement.
Again, that was Melissa Diaz. So lastly, let's hear from our third speaker, Jason Diaz.
Thank you for listening to us today. When I was 32 years old, I was diagnosed with an extremely rare form of stomach cancer called hereditary diffuse gastric cancer. 2 of my aunts have died from this cancer after being diagnosed in their 40s. My doctors recommended genetic testing because I was unusually young to be diagnosed with stomach cancer, and because multiple family members had died from stomach cancer. The testing showed that my family and I have a genetic mutation that makes me more than 80% likely to develop this rare cancer. Because of the deadly nature of this type of cancer, I had to have my stomach surgically removed in a procedure called total gastrectomy. My entire digestive system has been rewired. Life after stomach removal surgery is extremely difficult and painful. When my wife and I decided to have children, we knew we wanted to do everything in our power to protect our kids from the burden of this genetic mutation. So Melissa and I pursued IVF with HRC Fertility and Dr. Kolb because they promised to only use embryos without my stomach cancer mutation for the transfer. We trusted them to care for us and for our embryos because they knew us. And they knew that we were there to protect our future children from this. Dr. Kolb and HR Facility knew what was at stake, so we expected them to be incredibly careful. We never thought this could even happen. By trusting Dr. Kolb and HRC, it turned out to be the biggest mistakes of our lives. When we went to HRC, our intentions couldn't have been any clearer. It's impossible to describe the horror we have experienced due to HRC and Dr. Kolb's unbelievable mistake. Because of their error, our greatest fear has become our reality. I know the pain of this cancer personally, and I know it through watching other family members suffer and eventually die from it. I wouldn't want anyone on earth to experience this type of pain. And now I will be forced to watch my own son, my own flesh and blood, go through this after Melissa and I worked so hard to protect him. Every day, my heart is hurting for my baby boy, knowing the pain and challenges he has ahead of him. Before I finish, I just want him to know that I love him so much. And I love you too, babe. I know somehow we will get through this with strength and grace, but there needs to be justice. And as hard as it is to talk about this, I know it's important for us to share our story so that HRC doesn't inflict this kind of pain and suffering on anyone else ever again. That concludes my statement.
Again, that was Jason Diaz, and that takes us to the Q&A portion of the call. Melissa and Adam and Jason, why don't you step in a little closer so we can see you all in the frame. So for media, if you wish to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. As a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you have any issues with the Q&A function, with the hand raise function, there is a Q&A, a text-based Q&A box that you can use, and we'll do our best to get to all those questions. Before we begin, I do want to mention that a video recording of this news event will be available online later today. As soon as it's processed, it'll be at lostembryos.com, along with the other media materials. That's lostembryos.com, no spaces. You can find those media materials linked in the chat box as well. So let's go ahead and take our first question. It's coming from Jane Ridley at Insider. Jane, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, first of all, Jason and Melissa, thank you very much for talking to us all. I can't imagine how difficult it is for you to talk about this situation, and I applaud you for coming forward and sharing this with you. And I was very touched by Jason's comments at the very end of his statement about how much he loves you, Melissa, and your beautiful son. I just wondered if you could tell me a little bit about your longing for a family and why this was so important for you. I know you got married in 2018. Could you just tell me how important family has been to you and starting to have babies?
Well, I come from a big family, so I have a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles and 3 brothers. So I was excited to have a family of my own. Ever since I was little, I wanted children. I was always attached to little cousins ever since I was young. So I wanted at least 2 kids. But knowing early in my family that I had the BRCA, I wanted to do everything that I could possible for my kids not to go through it. And then meeting my husband and him getting diagnosed and ending up having a genetic cancer mutation, it was just shocking. The odds of us finding each other and having different types of mutations was insane. But knowing what he went through, what I went through, the suffering that we saw in our parents' eyes, I did not want my kids to go through that. So learning about the genetic screening for embryos, I was so excited to know that there was something that we could do to prevent our kids from going through what we have went through. And we did everything we could possible to try to give them a fighting chance at life with a healthy, non-genetic mutation in their life.
Thank you very much.
All right. Our next question is coming from Chris Adler. Chris Adler at iHeart Radio. Chris, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Diaz. Chris Adler with KFI News. I thank you for sharing your story and the information. I do want to clarify whether or not, if you can tell us, if the doctor himself has been confirmed to have changed those records or if it is still unclear at this time.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know exactly who it was who altered the records, and we don't know who ordered the alteration of those records. It's a serious issue, and it's something that we're going to get to the bottom of.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Just as a reminder, we do want to make sure that reporters on the line have a chance to pose their questions. So if you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function and we'll unmute you when it's your turn to ask a question. And as another reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you're having any issues with your audio or the raise hand function, you can go ahead and use the text-based Q&A box. Next question is coming from Lenny Bernstein, Washington Post. Lenny, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks for doing this. You described in the lawsuit a sit down that you were invited to as a result of the confusion and alarm that occurred when you've got this record. Did that sit down ever occur, and did anyone at HRC verbally admit to you that they had screwed up? Or maybe a better way of asking that is, what did they say to you if that sit down occurred?
The sit down, you guys talk about what they said.
To be completely honest with you, we never really got an explanation about the screw up. We would have loved one, but they never responded to any emails that we sent them when we first found this out. They never responded to any phone calls that I made to them when I obviously was going crazy trying to figure out if this was true or not.
HRC Fertility did admit that it made a very serious mistake. In terms of the sit down, once we looked at the records that they sent to Melissa and Jason and saw that there was an alteration of their records, that sit down never occurred. Thanks for your question, Lenny.
So, sorry, to follow up, in what form did they admit that they had made this mistake?
Well, when my husband called, he was super upset when we first found out. He called to try to speak to anybody he could. Person that he spoke to on the phone apologized to him.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So when I called HRC, the corporate line, because I couldn't get a hold of anybody at the HRC Pasadena location that would answer my call. And I was directed to a manager of some sort, but her secretary answered the phone. And at the time I was explaining to her what was going on, and she was in tears, but she couldn't get a hold of her manager because for whatever reason, and they attempted to send an email out asking if we could go in there and sit down with them. And at that point, I mean, time had already passed, you know, we were already heartbroken. And that's when we reached out to Adam.
So someone admitted this mistake, but you don't know who it is.
I don't know who it was. Yeah, like I said, I couldn't get a hold of anybody in HRC in Pasadena after calling Dr. Kolb's office, speaking to his secretary, speaking to the front secretary. So I Googled HRC, the corporate line, and that's when I was transferred to somebody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lenny. Okay. We have a follow-up here from Jane Ridley at Insider. Jane, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you for everything that you've shared so far. I'm sorry to touch on what I can only imagine is a very difficult set of emotions for you guys, but I wondered if you could express to me the feeling that day when you found out about your son's mutation. What did you say to each other? What support did you get from family? Is there any way that you were able to help cope with this news?
So the reason we found out is because I wanted to start the second transfer of my second baby. Once I read those reports, I was going through to see which embryos had which gene and which one I could use in the second transfer. And in that handwritten note, I did see that it said transferred. And it was our baby boy that was born. And it said it had the CDH1 mutation, and my heart sank. Like, knowing what my husband has gone through, the difficulties that his family have gone through, the ones that have removed their stomach to avoid getting cancer. And just picturing my happy baby boy going through that, my world just crushed. It was really hard to believe that it was real. I didn't want it to be real. I called him and told him he was at work, and he was in shock. He's like, please make sure it's correct, because I'm gonna call them. Like, this can't be true. And after trying to reach out, and they told me, yeah, this is your paperwork, that this is it, that there's no other paperwork. I just couldn't believe it. Our emotions were running crazy. There's like no words to describe it. I'm very close to my mother. I called her. I was crying on the phone with her. He's just such a happy baby. And to know the hurt in front of him that he has to face for something that we tried so hard to prevent, it crushes me. It hurts my soul. I just try to do everything I could to protect him.
So knowing the road that my son faces, it's extremely devastating. I was in that office when I was going through chemotherapy, begging Dr. Kolb to make sure that we didn't have any babies with the CDH1 gene, because I was going through it and I knew what life would be like. And finding out that everything that you had planned for in the future was now going to have to be altered was devastating. how do I prepare my son for what comes next? Why is it that he has to change his life at such a young age and he won't be able to experience the things that he should be able to experience as a young adult, as an adult? Simple things that we take for granted in life, like having a cheeseburger and drinking a soda at the same time. Taking him to the ballpark and letting him watch the game and, getting an ice cream. Those are things that will likely not be possible as he gets older. So yeah, it was extremely difficult to put all that in or wrap my mind around all the emotions that were going on. And I am thankful that I had my wife here because she is so cool, calm, and collective. Because I was gonna lose my mind that day.
May I ask a follow-up question? How's your son doing today? You mentioned what a happy baby he is. Can you describe his personality to me, and how things are going with his health at the moment?
He is a very, very happy and active boy. Just yesterday, we found out he learned to climb on the couch by himself. So we have to watch out for that now. But he's very, very happy, everywhere we go, we take him, everybody loves him. He's very chatty and friendly, loves saying new things, very happy boy. It's just
He only knows happiness.
Yeah.
That's all we preach to him. Every day we tell him how wonderful he is.
What a good job he does.
We'll clap his hands when he does something well. I mean, he's an amazing, amazing, amazing boy.
We have another follow-up question. It's coming from Chris Adler at iHeartRadio. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. For Attorney Wolf, I just want to clarify, could Dr. Kolb have certainly been able to see this gene in Mr. and Mrs. Diaz's son's DNA with absolute certainty prior to implanting this embryo?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The answer is yes. I am looking at Melissa and Jason's medical record right now. There it is, clear as day, that embryo number 1, the embryo that became their son. It says the gene was detected for diffuse gastric cancer. It couldn't be any more clear. This was just a tragic, tragic error by HRC Fertility and Dr. Kolb, and it's inexcusable. Every day for the rest of their lives, Jason and Melissa and their son are going to have to deal with this. Nobody should have to bear that burden.
And sir, just as a follow-up to that, has Dr. Kolb said anything about it being accidental, unintentional? Has he made any word or said anything about this?
We have not received anything from Dr. Kolb or HRC Fertility about this other than their medical records. And as we noted, in the very beginning of October, Melissa received records that clearly no longer contain the notation about which embryos HRC Fertility had transferred. About 6 weeks later, through counsel, we finally received another set of those records. This was now a different set that contained the proper notations. We don't know why that original material was redacted, altered, taken off, falsified, but we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions at this time in the queue. So we do want to make sure, let's take a quick second follow-up from Jane Ridley. Insider, Jane, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm sorry to slightly dominate. Do you guys have any advice to other parents who might seek this IVF genetic screening route in the light of your ordeal? I pray that your case is extremely rare, but if you did have any advice for them, what might it be?
ask questions, double check everything. We always refer back to when he was going through chemotherapy, where the nurses would come into the room every half hour to an hour, where they would ask you, what's your name? What's your date of birth? Is this correct? So during the process of the transfer of our baby boy, not once did they ask me, is this the gene that you want to transfer? Is this the correct embryo? So just double check everything. I'm very scared and nervous to go through it again, to try to have a second baby. But this time I will ask my questions. I will double check. It's heartbreaking that it had to come to this, but just be aware of what's going on with your own body, what they're trying to do with your body.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing, and that was really eloquent, Melissa, which is, one of the questions maybe that people need to ask is, has your clinic ever misused the genetic material of your patients? They ever transferred an embryo that they shouldn't have transferred? Did they ever, what a crazy world we live in, that you need to ask that question. And when you get the answer of, yes, we have in the past, you might want to consider going somewhere else.
Thank you. We want to make sure that everybody knows where to get more information following today's news conference. To connect with any of the speakers that you've heard from today, or to just get more info, you can contact Max Carlin at 703-276-3255. And that's 703-276-3255. Recording of this news event and the related media materials are going to be online at lostembryos.com. You should be able to find the news release right now. It's going out via email as well, and then the video recording will be posted once it's done processing. We do thank you all for joining this news event held by the law firm Peiffer Wolf, and that concludes today's news event. Thank you.